Hello CS400 and welcome to my Java tutorial on debugging. I wanted to start off by saying that not everybody actually likes the Eclipse debugging tool. Some people kind of just get by using simple print statement logic. And what I mean by this is people will basically print out values of variables as they go through their code to make sure everything is kind of turning out how they expect it to. So an example of this could be if I had this array of rectangles that I'm trying to create. If I decide that I want to make sure that rectangles are being added exactly how I want it to be, then I can actually print out each variable in that array as I go. And then if I run this, I actually am just getting kind of the objects. And so to get around this, you usually will want to access different variables within that rectangle. So if I go over to my rectangle class, we can see that each rectangle has an area, and instead of making a getter, I'm just going to make this public quickly, and then I'm going to do area. And so now if I run this, it's going to print out actually all these different areas. So that's one way of doing it, but I think that you might find the Eclipse debugging tool will be helpful because sometimes the issue is code can get quite lengthy. Not really in this example, but we know that that happens. So the nice thing about the Eclipse debugger is that we can set what's called breakpoints. Breakpoints allow us to specify where in our program we're kind of going to want to check out with our debugging tool. And so I'm actually going to comment this back in. Okay. And then in order to set our debugging breakpoint, you are actually going to double click wherever you want it to be set. I had already had one set there. So you double click on this left sidebar here. And so now what we can do is click on the debugger tool. And that's this bug-like button right up here. And then it's going to tell us that we're going to be switching from our regular Java perspective into what's called the debugging perspective, which of course is what we want to do. Something that is really useful is the variables within the debugging tool. Honestly, the debugger is pretty useless without it, and so we want to make sure that we have our variables showing in this right corner here. So if you don't already have those variables, then you can either click right over here on variables, or if you have a Windows machine, then you can go to Window, show view, and then go to variables. I think it's the same on a Mac, but I'm not entirely sure on that, so I apologize. But the point is now we can see all of our variables as we go. And so instead of needing to print anything out, we actually can just kind of have it here on this little chart. So now this part right here that's highlighted is the part where the debugger stopped at before running. So it has not run this line yet. And from here we have three very important options, and those options are here, here, and here, these three arrows up here. The first one I'm going to talk about is the step into option. It's the one that I probably use the most, and it's this one right here, the kind of shorter arrow, not the one that loops over and not the one that's at right angle. And if you click step into, you'll notice that we go and we're automatically taken into what Java is doing kind of in the background normally for us, but we are having Java kind of loading in this class for us. And honestly, I don't think that this is a very useful feature at all. I really only care about having my code, and so what I recommend doing so that we can focus more on our own debugging is to turn off this feature. The way you do that, at least on Windows, is you go to Window, and then preferences. I think this is the only part that's different on a Mac. I believe that for preferences, you would go to File. Again, sorry that I'm not totally sure on that, but for Windows, at least, you go to Window and then Preferences. And then from here, you will go down to Java, and then under Debug, go over to where it says Step Filtering. And then click Use Step Filters, and honestly just click all of these because we really, again, do not really need to see all of that. So we'll do Apply and Close. And now if we run this, here we'll click Stop quickly. Now if we run at our breakpoint again, and we step into it, it's not going to take us into that class anymore. It's going to take us directly into our constructor. So normally this is something that's kind of happening in Java without us seeing it. But instead, now we're seeing kind of everything that's going on in the background, and that can be super, super helpful because sometimes it's the littlest things that can go wrong. So now let's say we want to be looking at our variables as we go. So if we run this again, of course, our variables need to be open. And as we step into things, then we have to go through all this, but then we can see slowly we're creating a length for our new rectangle. And if we click on that, we can see that it's 4. If we keep stepping into it, then it now has a width and it has an area. If you want to see all those values, then if you click on this little caret thing here, then there becomes the 3 variables right here. And if you click on area, you can see that it's 20, length, width. So that's pretty helpful. And then, so now let's say that we are really confident that our constructor is working really well. We don't really want to waste time watching another rectangle be created with that constructor. What we can press instead is what's called the Step Over button, and that's this little arrow that looks like it's literally stepping over something. And if we do that, we don't really go into all those details that we don't really care about, so it's really nice. As you can see, I got rid of that print statement that I had before inside this for loop, and that's because instead of doing that, we're going to be using our debugger tool. And I'm going to keep stepping over things because if I step into it, then I'm still going to have to keep watching these rectangles be made, and I'd have to watch 10 rectangles be made. So we'll keep stepping over it, and it'll just kind of be going through this loop. But if I want to see what's inside my array, remember my array is called R, then I click this arrow, and I can see the 10 different indices that are created. And so far I've created 3 rectangles, and I can also see the area, length, and width just like before. So I don't have to mess around with a bunch of print statements. I can just kind of step through my code and see it all going on right here. So it's extremely helpful. And now if we just keep stepping over, we're like, okay, cool. I can see every single rectangle is slowly being created here, and it's being created as we expected. I accidentally just stepped over that one, but that's okay because it doesn't really matter for this example. And now we're going to go over to our rectangle class because I'm calling a method on rectangle 2 that is inside of our rectangle class. So now if I step into this, I'm going to be looking at this method. And let's say after clicking on it, I'm like, oh wait, I already know that this works. This is totally fine. Instead of going through each line, the last button we're going to concern ourselves with is the step return. And so let's say I only cared about this line right here, and I'm like, okay, new length is working, but I have a whole bunch of stuff afterwards, and I just want to be done with this method. Then step return, the step return button is going to let us, I guess, return outside of this method and then just be done with it. So that's really useful as well. I think the step into is going to be something that's really helpful for you guys. And one last thing I wanted to mention is that you can set multiple breakpoints. So we have one breakpoint here. If I wanted to set another one, let's say down here, remember that breakpoints are really where we're just telling Eclipse to stop before continuing to run. So if I click on debug, then it's like, oh, I found a breakpoint, I have to stop and pause here. And then let's say I am kind of doing some stuff here, checking over things, and then I'm like, okay, I don't really care about all this stuff in between. I want to go to my second breakpoint. So to jump down to that, you just press this green button, resume, and then it'll jump all the way down to whatever your next breakpoint is. So I hope this was helpful for you all. If you have any more questions, then please feel free to stop by either Andy, Katie, or Katie's office hours, or you can always set up a Skype call with me and we can figure out a time that works out for both of us.